This, believe it or not, is the brand new PROTON X50. Yes, I know it looks exactly the same, but PROTON says that they have made enough adjustments to this car to make it more relevant than ever in our market. Which means 20 parts have either been upgraded or revised in order to improve NVH. Fuel consumption has somehow been miraculously revised as well. And there's still no Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. But more importantly, will this remain Malaysia's #1 B-segment SUV? My name is Aiman Abdullah, this is Malaysian Motoring, and this is our review of the 2024 PROTON X50 RC. Now, one of the biggest changes have not occurred here. So up front, you'll find the same 1.5-litre turbocharged 3-cylinder petrol engine, which in this flagship guise produces 177 PS and 255 Newton meters of torque. Power continues to go to the front wheels via a 7-speed dual-clutch automatic. However, PROTON says that the final drive ratio for the X50 has been adjusted in order to improve overall NVH and refinement at speed. This is one of the many things that PROTON says they've changed in order to improve this car for the 2024 model year. Now, aside from that, stylistically there are no changes to the X50, so you still get the same very aggressive front end, which we think still looks very good. You get the ethereal bow, you still get the infinite weave elements, and you still get full LED headlights up front, replete with LED fog lights which also function as corner lights. Now, the thing about the X50 is that it's never been a bad looking car. We've always appreciated the way this car looks, and we've always appreciated its proportions, and so the design wasn't necessarily something that they had to change. However, given the fact that this is now a newer model, albeit at exactly the same price, we would have appreciated some stylistic changes in order to differentiate it from the vehicle that it replaces. And that same sense of continuity continues on the side, because we still get the same variety of alloy wheels in exactly the same designs wrapped in the same tires, which on this flagship model are a set of Continental units with this nice sort of dual-tone alloy finish. We still get the same dual-tone paintwork for the flagship models, which also includes black wing mirror housings. We still get a touch-based sensor here for the doors, which means that you pull to unlock and simply tap to lock. And overall, nothing really had to change here because it wasn't a bad-looking car to begin with, but maybe some new alloys or new color would have been nice. Now at the back, again, there are no changes. So you still get the LED combination tail lights here, you still get the nice piece of satin chrome that goes all the way across the tailgate, and we still get 4 exhaust pipes, which is still one more than the number of cylinders under the bonnet. Now, what I would have appreciated here is if PROTON had used the new script for their cars. So for example, the X90 and S70 now have the PROTON script done with that lovely sort of beveled edge. Same thing goes with the model designation, but evidently the X50 is not deserving. Now, there is one significant change back here, and that comes in the form of the power tailgate, which is now standard fitment on the flagship models instead of it having to be a dealer specified and dealer fitted option as part of purchase. This apparently is something that a lot of buyers requested, and so PROTON has shoved it in. Now, what hasn't changed, or rather what will continue to require a bit of shoving, is fitting stuff into this boot, because this is not the largest boot in the segment, far from it for that matter, but it is large enough for 4 people for a weekend getaway, I suppose. It certainly does justice as a family car, but it's not cavernous in any way. That said, however, the Subaru XV and the Chery Amoda 5 do have slightly less practical load bays in terms of, for example, overall height, because the XV is quite shallow, and for the Amoda 5 it doesn't quite go in quite as far. You can fold the rear seat 60/40, however, should you need to load in more items, and underneath this boot floor you will find a space saver spare wheel as well as all of the sort of emergency toolkit and so on, which means that should you have an unforeseen incident, at least you can sort it out very quickly. Now in here, as you can see, there have been a raft of upgrades that you can't see. So the only perceivable change and upgrade that you can notice in this car is obviously the integrated head unit. Because according to Proton, the RAM has been doubled, so now you have 2 gigabytes. The storage has also been doubled, so you now have 32 gigabytes. But aside from that, a lot of the changes in here are again things that you cannot see. So all of the NVH upgrades, things like, for example, the materials in the A-pillar, as well as within the doors and the wheel arches, all of that contribute to a slightly more positive experience in the car without you noticing that there have been any changes. And so I suppose you'll just have to take my word for it, or Proton's. Now, aside from that, again, this interior didn't really require that many changes because there wasn't really much wrong with it. So for starters, material quality continues to be very impressive with a lot of soft touch material even up here on the dash. You even get some more soft touch materials here, but a lot of the stuff still remains. Actually, this used to be hard plastic, this is now soft. That's good, but this is still scratchy plastic, this is still scratchy plastic, this, annoyingly, is still scratchy plastic, but at least your eye is drawn away by this full brushed metal work on the dash front, as well as a slight little bit of bright work around the air conditioning vents, so at least, again, your eye is drawn elsewhere, so the material quality bits are not really that much of a concern. On top of that, I will also note that in terms of interior quality, this is par for the course. You're going to struggle to find cars that offer better interior quality within this segment, forget alone this price point. Now, I say that because overall quality in terms of build quality in here still remains quite positive. So for example, this is still very solid. All of this still feels very solid. The door handles still feel a bit flimsy. The seats, however, still feel very well sculpted, and you can get quite comfortable in this car with a decent amount of adjustment in the electric-powered driver's seat as well as the adjustable steering wheel. However, the things that haven't changed have to do with technology and ergonomics. So for starters, the first time I got in the X50, I struggled to find a comfortable seating position because the X50 requires you to sit a little bit further up than you might necessarily expect, because if you try to sit further down, you don't have enough under thigh support and the steering wheel will not adjust in such a way that you will feel comfortable. But even when I'm sat further upright, the steering wheel is still a little bit further away than I would like, simply because the way you should have this adjusted is that you should be able to bend your wrists over the steering wheel rim. However, as you can see, my back has now made quite a bit of distance from the backrest, and this is already quite an upright seating position. If I get any more upright, the backrest will not be able to relieve the weight of my back and instead center it on sort of the fulcrum of my arse. This is getting very technical, but in any case, it takes some adjustment to get comfortable in this car, and so I do advise that you test drive an X50 extensively before purchase. Now, with technology, on the other hand, it is largely the same. So while we've upgraded this IHU, so now it's a lot snappier, a lot more responsive, you get Spotify built in, you still don't get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Now, Proton has walked back on some of its commitments because previously they said that Android Auto may be made available via an over-the-air update. And then very recently they said there will be no over-the-air updates that bring Android Auto to existing vehicles. This is very sad because this is a good car and we would have liked Android Auto. But that aside, at least quality in here is still good, so all the buttons still feel very nice. We still get a panoramic sunroof with physical controls to manipulate it, unlike the Proton S70. We also get physical controls for volume, unlike the Proton S70. And we still get this lovely steering wheel. So overall, in here, everything does feel quite good. As you can see, we have a phone holder here, so we can put phones in place because we don't have Android Auto. Now, annoyingly, these two front seats remain as they were, which means you do not get a powered passenger seat even in this flagship model, and you do not get ventilation even on this flagship model, which is unfortunate because Chery has proven you can do that in the Motor 5. Now, with the front seat set up in my driving position, I'm about 170 centimeters. I have a good amount of headroom and a really good amount of knee room. And because I have to sit a little bit higher, like I mentioned earlier, there is plenty of space to tuck my feet in underneath the seat in front of me, which does help because if I sit like this, I don't have much in terms of under thigh support. The bench does extend a good way, so when I do stretch out, at least there is some support there. Now, in terms of interior quality, there is a little bit of a downgrade because now the door cards are lots of stretchy plastic, but at least you still get some soft touch material here and here, so where you rest your arm will be at least a little bit comfortable. You also get a couple of coat hooks, you get some pockets behind the seat to get a couple of USB-A ports and a set of crotch coolers to keep rear passengers comfortable. I have a deployable armrest here with a couple of cup holders, and it does feel quite sturdy and solid, and it's at the right angle, unlike what we've seen from some Toyotas. Ahem. Now, in addition to all of this, obviously you still get the usual safety accoutrements, which means you get your ISOFIX mounts back here, which are very easily locatable because they just sit in sort of these little slits, so it should be quite easy for you to mount a child seat. That said, however, the doors do not open as wide as I would like, which means a bulky rear-facing child seat may be a little bit of a struggle to get back here, and there isn't an ISOFIX mount on the front passenger seat, which means that you can't put a bulky seat there and have an adult passenger in the rear instead. Also, this very high belt line does mean that even as an adult, the view out the side is somewhat compromised, which means that if you have children, they might not be able to get a view out, which may also increase the likelihood of car sickness. But at least, again, you have that full panoramic sunroof, which you can manipulate via physical controls, which means that if it gets too hot, you can close it, and while it's still sort of mendung, you can pull it back open, and your children will be happy back here. Speaking of children, because the Premium and Flagship X both use this sort of leatherette upholstery, that does mean that if you have an accident in the car, it should be quite easy to clean, which is something that's very important for family buyers. Now, when we talk about the X50 running change, that's what RC stands for, Proton's big claims are that this car is now quieter and more refined than ever before. But this is something that you can only really experience behind the wheel, so let's not waste any more time. Now, driving the Proton X50 is a largely familiar affair because this is broadly the same car that we've driven many times before. But Proton stresses that the changes to these cars are to the things you cannot see, which is why you have to experience it to understand where all that money and time has gone. One thing that I forgot to mention earlier is the fact that there is now also an upgraded 360-degree camera, which is now a lot better than what it used to have, which was laughable at best. And now it is so good, in fact, that I managed to navigate an obstacle course without using the mirrors or the glass windows at all. And you can check that out in our X50 preview right up here. But enough about that, we actually have to feel what this car is like out on the open road. And I have to say that it does feel like as good a car as it always did. The X50 always impressed in terms of interior build quality, the lack of rattles and squeaking and stuff like that. But it did fall short in certain areas, particularly in terms of NVH. So we'll start with the good bits. So up front, we still get the same 1.5-litre turbocharged 3-cylinder engine with direct injection, producing 177 PS and 255 Newton meters of torque, with power going to the front wheels via a 7-speed dual-clutch automatic gearbox. We covered that earlier. Now, as a result, the performance of this car is still quite sprightly and attentive, which means that the X50 is still a very good town car. On top of that, it does feel like the throttle has been ever so slightly reworked in order to make this car feel a little bit more responsive. Not that it was ever suffering previously, but now it's just a little bit better. On top of that, I must remark that the steering in the X50 remains as positive and as engaging as it ever was. There's nothing in terms of feedback. That's quite normal with vehicles with electric power steering, but the immediacy and the very natural weighting of the steering wheel means that it is quite confidence-inspiring. Doesn't matter whether you're at town speeds or if you're at motorway speeds, it just feels like a very natural place to be. Now, while the ergonomics in this car are not all that great, particularly in terms of the seat position, because as you can see, I'm stretched a little bit further out than I would like to be, but it's still relatively comfortable. The seats, for example, hold me in just the right way, and it provides just enough in terms of lateral support, which means I don't get flung out of the car in corners, and all of that is still relatively good. And on top of that, thanks to the improved NVH levels in this car, I can say that at town speeds, when you hit potholes or speed bumps and so on, there's very little in this car to rattle or squeak or make noise, which means that, again, it makes you feel like this car is of a higher quality than it was in the past, and it is of a higher quality compared to a lot of this vehicle's competitors within the B-segment crossover space. But I think the X50's trump card actually comes in the way that it drives, because short of a Mazda CX-3, the X50 is perhaps one of the better B-segment crossovers to steer. Now, when you're at town speeds, you'll appreciate again the immediacy of the throttle as well as the natural weighting of the steering wheel. But once speeds pick up and you have to carry yourself into slightly more varied scenarios, you will realize that the X50 has a little bit more polish in terms of the way it carries itself. For example, when you're driving through town speeds, you'll realize that this car doesn't have that much in terms of body lean, which means that when you need to make quick lane changes and so on, you can do so relatively confidently. On top of that, the relatively small steering wheel in this X50 also makes it quite a lot of fun to chuck around. It almost lends itself this air of sportiness almost. And once speed picks up and you hit the throttle, you realize just how polished this powertrain has become. We first saw it, of course, in the X50, but then it eventually got into the X70 and the S70, and it's now available as a mild hybrid in the X90. And there's no doubt that all of these applications and continued refinements of this powertrain, in addition to it now being built in Tanjung Malim, means that this engine has just gotten better with time. It's quite smooth. Compared to the outgoing X50, you don't get that much rattling in here at all. I suspect they've reworked the engine mounts and perhaps added a little bit more sound deadening, because even on full throttle, you don't really get that much noise coming in from the engine bay. It's remarkably refined, this thing. On top of that, the biggest issue with this car in terms of NVH was actually in terms of wind noise, because road noise in this car was always relatively well managed. It was just the whistling that you'd get from the A-pillar that was particularly irritating. Where it used to start at about 75, 80 kilometers an hour, now that whistle has been significantly suppressed and only really becomes apparent north of the national speed limit. When you're just pootling about below 100 kilometers an hour, there's barely anything there. This is, I'm sure, something that would annoy the hell out of existing X50 buyers because they still have to deal with that noise. On top of that, there also comes a degree of refinement in terms of the ADAS systems. Now, this car's traffic jam assist or stop and go functionality remains a little bit rough around the edges. I wouldn't want to use it too much because it's not only unnerving, but also feels a little bit amateur. But when you're using it on the motorway, at least to regulate your speed, as not to get too close to the car in front of you, it does seem to do things relatively well, a bit better than some of the other cars within the segment, particularly better than the Corolla Cross, for example. But there still seems to be some way to go in terms of the advanced driver assist features, particularly, or rather especially, in terms of the adaptive cruise control. In other areas, however, the X50 continues to be very impressive. So, for example, on those ADAS features, the X50 offers full level 2 semi-autonomy, which means you have lane keep assist, lane centering, etc. All of these things work towards making this a safer car to drive and to live with. The X50 continues to offer full level 2 semi-autonomy, which means that this is a relatively easy car for you to live with, and is certainly something that you wouldn't feel too concerned about ferrying your family in. On top of that, this car's impressive ASEAN NCAP ratings also mean that in terms of, actual crash safety, should the worst befall you, at least your X50 should be capable of keeping you and your family very safe. So overall, just to recap, the X50 is now quieter and more refined. It's slightly more economical than before, returning about 9 liters to the 100 as opposed to the 10 to 11 that we used to see from the pre-running change car. And the technology in here has been improved a little bit, so it's a little bit more responsive, a little bit more snappy, but it still doesn't have Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. So where does that leave us with this car? Well, the X50 continues to put a very strong proposition forward from Proton, and I have no doubt that a lot of B-segment SUV buyers will continue to be swayed by the X50. It is deeply, deeply unfortunate that this car still doesn't come with Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, and on top of that, Proton has rolled back its previous promise of offering it via an over-the-air update, because now apparently it's only going to come to new cars. Additionally, the fact that the X50 only offers a 5-year warranty, which previously would have been just fine, but now in the face of the Chery Amoda 5 with its 7-year warranty, it does mean that this car is somewhat on the back foot. But it is only the Amoda 5 that it has to be concerned about, because every other car within the segment continues to offer a 5-year warranty, so I guess it all just balances out anyway. So would I recommend the new Proton X50? I would, actually, because I think that a lot of the pain points that I used to have with this car have been addressed. And so overall, it creates a much more pleasant experience to live with an X50. And I think that that lack of friction or the reduction in friction rather, has helped a lot in terms of my opinion of this car. The X50, when it launched, was a very strong proposition simply because it was the most affordable way to get into a B-segment SUV. However, with more and more brands arriving on our market and all trying to compete within this very hotly contested space, it's become quite clear that the X50's value proposition is not as strong now as it was when it first launched. And so this running change, although admittedly not quite as extensive as we would have liked to have seen from Proton, was certainly necessary in order to keep this X50 competitive. And competitive it is indeed. I wouldn't mind living with something like this, although I would just need a phone holder. Now, if you don't like phone holders, or more importantly, if you do much more motorway miles, or if you just don't want a Proton in your driveway for whatever reason, then check out the Chery Amoda 5, which I think offers a slightly more comfort-oriented drive and ride, but also does offer Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. If you're willing to spend a little bit more money, then I think that the Toyota Corolla Cross Hybrid would work for those who are looking to be a little bit more penny pinching in terms of fuel economy. And of course, if you want the car that everyone else seems to really want if they can afford it, then there's also the Honda HR-V, although I'm made to understand that both the turbo and hybrid models are suffering from some degree of quality issues. Although that's just what I've seen on social media. In any case, that has been our review of the 2024 PROTON X50 RC. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to be notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and you can join our new WhatsApp channel. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We will catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.